Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our second episode of Quality Unfiltered. And I'm equally excited for today's episode as well. I'm Parveen Khan.
And hiya, I'm Suman Bala. Quality Unfiltered is all about real stories, our experiences, our challenges, reflections coming from our work and everything around quality and leadership roles. Today, we are diving into the evolution of test strategy because test strategy is one of those things that has changed so much.
Yeah, so today we are going back in a proper nostalgia trip, you can say, like back in 10, 15 years ago to explore how the strategy has evolved from, those, if you remember, if people remember, like those massive documents that nobody reads, nobody read in those times as well, right? To what we are doing now, where quality is supposed to be everyone's job, like everyone's responsibility, right? So before diving into to diving deep into this topic, right? So let's start with what is even a test strategy?
So for me, test strategies, how are we going to approach quality? And I do see, people get confused about test strategy and test plan.
Mm-hmm.
Praveen, what do you think? What is a test strategy?
Yeah, test. This is like a term, like everyone has different definition, everyone has a different perception or assumptions, right? Like when you, like any team, any company that we go into, everyone has different things, right? So for me, test strategy is like, it's like a quality strategy. I call it as a quality strategy because the reason why we have a strategy is how can we build quality in, right? It's like, so this is why I refer quality strategy. And for me, it is about how are we approaching, what are our approaches, what tools are we going to use, what are the things that needs to be included, and what are in scope, what is out of scope. So quite a lot of details, and it's not about having a massive document, but at the same time having what is actually needed, for the context of whether it could be a project, it could be your initiative, it could be a product. And for me, it's like a living document. It's not like you define something and then that's it. You're never going to change that. It's not about that. It's about like a living document where it keeps evolving and you need to include a lot of things of how you're approaching your product, right? So, yeah, like what's your thoughts and around this?
Quite similar. I use this a lot. Quality we need to bake in.
Yeah.
Similar to if you're baking a cake, you can't, and if you add sugar at the end, you can't expect the cake to be sweet throughout, right? So we need to, like just fold in that quality throughout that. And then, like for me, that quality strategy, it's a living document, but one size doesn't fit all. You need to tailor that strategy based on your context. You need to tailor
Yeah.
that strategy based on the team. If I'm creating a strategy for a project, that will look entirely different to if I'm creating a quality strategy or engineering strategy for the organization. If you think about, like how the strategy documents have evolved throughout your career, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I think definitely. I do see it has evolved a lot, right? I remember those days when I was working in one of the startup where I was the first solo QE. My title was test analyst, and it was like a Word document that had everything, a lot of things that I used to think like, why do we even create this? Like, because no one used to read, and it's not even about read. Why do we create strategies, right? It's how can people implement that, right? It's not to read. It's not a document that you have to read and leave it, right? It's about guidance. It's showing you how you need to implement certain things. So for me, I think it has changed from some document that people might not know whether what they need to do. And it was more about, oh, this is a test strategy. So this is something a tester owns it. To now, it's like a quality strategy that, oh, how can we implement? What are the steps that we need to take to implement as a team?
That, like takes me back to when I started my career 20 years ago.
Mm.
We will create those, really long document, 20 to 40 pages of, and it has a standard template. Your
Yeah.
strategy should have these many sections,
Yes.
and a test lead or test manager will create it after, requirements were agreed, and the people in the team who will actually test the product, they will just, use it, adopt it,
Yeah.
and I couldn't wrap my head around that time because things like, was distinguishing between requirements, function requirements, what the product will do. And then there were
Mm.
non-functional requirements. And single time, the
Yeah,
non-functional requirements were like out of scope. Performance out of scope. Security testing out of scope. And I was like, why are we even doing it? But now when I think about it, test strategy for me is all about the whole team owning that quality. It's not about, just one person creating it, another just,
yeah.
adopting it. For me, everyone contributes to that strategy.
Exactly. I really like what you mentioned about non-functional requirements. Refer that mostly as a cross-functional requirements, which is same like non-functional and cross-functional. This is how quality strategy has evolved. You include everything from not just functional aspect of it, but also non-functional, cross-functional testing of, like, as you mentioned about performance testing, security, accessibility, observability, monitoring, so that people can think about it, right? And I think pretty much same. I believe I totally agree in the same thing. Like, it's more about, it's not something that, as you mentioned, a test manager or someone creating it and passing it to someone who can execute that. It's not about that. It's about, I've worked in some teams, everybody does it differently. And depending on the context, in some of the teams that I worked with, I use a empty board, like a Miro board or a Mural board, where all the teams used to come together and say, like, okay, tell us, let's see what are the services we are testing, how does it look, what are the dependencies. Now we know this context. Now what are the tools we need, what are the approaches, what are the level of testing. So it's about each other bouncing the ideas and thinking about how do we test it. And then, yeah, I think that this is the evolution part, is like, because everyone is thinking, everyone is contributing and collaborating, everyone feels like, yes, we all have to test it and we all have to implement it.
You mentioned about cross-functional requirements. That sounds definitely better than non-functional requirements. A couple of years ago, I worked with AD Stocks, who phrased these requirements as quality attribute, which fits really nicely because performance is, for me, it's a quality attribute. That's how I'm going to measure the quality of the performance of the project. If my app is taking 30 seconds to load, I was like, I'm going to say performance is slow. Right. So it's
Mhm.
an attribute I associate with. For a couple of years, I have been using Dan Ashby's continuous testing model to drive that strategy. And I also heavily refer to Janet Gregory's and Lisa Crispin's holistic testing approach.
Yeah,
Every time we do something, I might not make that, like Infinity One, but I talk about, okay, what kind of testings or checks we need to do here, what checks we need to do at this stage, what things we need to do, talk about like shift right, where they do monitoring, and what things we need to test in our
yeah.
production so we can use that information for the next feature delivery. So that's, I refer to this a lot within my teams, because when you look at that holistic testing or continuous testing,
Mm.
everyone in the team, whether they are tester, quality engineer, developer, business analyst, or a release manager, they contribute to that quality of the
Yeah.
product.
Yeah, that's correct. Like, that's true, right? Models always helpful. I use Dan Ashby's and Janet and Lisa's model because it's like, it's a visual. And when we think about testing to bring everyone together, we need, everybody reads and contributes in a different way. So of course, like, models are one of the better way of getting people to see what we mean, like, showing them the whole holistic model of where does what fits in, instead of just saying that, okay, let's do unit testing, let's do integration testing, and let's do this and that, but showing when that happens in the cycle. So that gives people more understanding, more visual way of, like, oh, this is where it fits in and this is why it fits in. And even making use of models to come up with an approach, yes. And at the same time, what has evolved is, like, there's no need of just using the same document as Word document as well. We can use mind map, we can use a template, a very simple where
Can be
it's,
anything, but
yeah,
team can understand, right?
yeah,
And what, when I think about, like this continuous testing model or how the evolution has changed, initially the testing will happen only in that test column
yeah.
after the development phase, right? A
Hmm.
standard, typical waterfall.
Yeah.
Even when a decade ago people started to talk about agile, they were still doing mini waterfalls. Testing was still happening in the test column on Jira. But
Yeah.
now, when we use these models, we can kick off those conversations where testing doesn't need to happen in one single thing. Testing
Yeah.
happens throughout the life
Yeah.
cycle.
Yeah.
And we can change this mindset that it's not like when we are building strategy, we are not focusing on how can we find more bugs or,
Yeah.
what we can't miss or what we can,
Yeah.
sidetrack. It's all about how whole team will own that own quality.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think I just want to mention another thing as well, right? About this when we're discussing a whole all about what's included in quality strategy, right? Also, like depending on the context, it could be a small project that you're working on, or there could be some kind of initiatives which has hard deadlines, for example. Who doesn't have deadlines, right? So in those cases, I feel like it becomes so important that you define what are the things included and then how much estimations. We all do estimations, right? Because
People
all
forget
those,
it's an estimation, it's not written in stone, right?
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I want to touch a bit more about like hard deadlines you mentioned.
yes,
Currently, we release quite often, right? We are not
yeah,
releasing once a month. APIs we might release a couple of times in a week. App we are releasing on regular cadence. So, bit of a controversial question here. So, do you think in such a fast paced environment where we want to release as many times as we can, do fast, and we want faster feedback, do we even need a test strategy document anymore? Because I worked with the teams that swear by M, and other things, they're a waste of time.
yeah, that's a very interesting question. Yes. Like, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. So, for me, I feel again, like with testing, anything that we talk about, everything is so context driven, right? I have worked on teams where we never used anything to do with quality strategy or test strategy because, again, like, the teams, the difference I see, like, maybe this is my difference, like, where we all were working collaboratively so much. It was like we had like very much everyone had a understanding of what quality is and how do we build in, and everyone were interested in how can they build quality, like how can they write automated test, for example, right? So that it's not just about putting it on QE. So those, we had the team that has that kind of mindset, and we never used quality strategy, or we never sat and wrote any kind of confluence. We never agreed to anything that, oh, this is what we need. We kind of our communication and collaboration was our strategy itself. Like we evolved through our conversations. How do we do? How, what tools do we use? What framework we use, and when to test what. So we never documented because that was a like a collaboration. But then there are teams where I had like we have to create strategy because it's like when I say have to, it's more about like okay, we have to come to like have a understanding of, because there are different members in the team who has different understanding about quality, how things are done, or maybe they have a different understanding of, oh, what tool do we use for this type of testing, or what is included, oh, do we need a performance testing or not, are we, is it in scope or not. So all these things, so it's more about so in those scenarios where there's hard deadlines, as I said, where you're building a greenfield project, we have a hard deadline, then you as a team come together, and like again the whole like business driven deadlines, if you have, right, then what is in scope, what can be done, and what is out of scope, it is clearly written so that people don't get confused, or they don't have a like they have a clear understanding that this is what, why it is out of scope and how are mitigating that, and it's like business product owner, everyone agrees to it and the team agrees to it. So I have worked in both ways, and I don't say that we should have strategy or we shouldn't. It totally depends.
I completely agree. It depends so much on that, like, team dynamics as well. In my current team, we have not drafted or documented as such because that's more like a team agreement on how we are going to approach quality, what checks we are going to do from idea creation to after the release. But if I think about, I've also worked in the roles where I was leading multiple teams, and you want to define, some sort of baseline for the business. In that case, I will, drive, document quality strategy. But for me, strategies have always worked on some of the quality engineering principles I will lay down. And one of the principle would be whole team ownership. principles such as in like automation that works, thinking about, like risk and customer first, using, data to test it. But these principles can act as a foundation, and then you can build your strategy on top of it when thinking about org level quality strategy.
Yeah. Exactly, right. And this is where it differs. You have org level strategy and and then you'll have a team level or initiative level or a project level strategy where you kind of have to define. And again, when I say this, it's also needed sometimes. Maybe it is also needed because you are in a regulatory industry where you need to document, even though your team is already your team is already having those communications and you know what you're doing as a team, but then you still have to document something because you have to go through the auditing or maybe industry regulation. So even in
Yeah.
that case you might need it. So it's not about let's not do it for the sake of not doing it, or let's do it for the sake of doing it. It's more about why it is needed, when it is needed, and then you can always define, right? Like many of our listeners as well, like maybe even you, right? Like you've seen that one page test plan as well,
Yeah.
right?
And I
As
do
simple
use
as,
that.
yeah, like we use that as well. Like it's more about using what is more simple, that is action driven. Like it's not about just creating that document which is sitting, but that creates action out of it and creates a shared understanding of so that people refer to it. Like for example, we might have, like in one of my teams that I worked with, like we had a very detailed level strategy, but we needed that, and it even though it was such a detailed and such a huge document, people still would refer because they would see, oh, did we include this specific thing, or what is the what tool was it, or maybe how did we define UAT, or who are the stakeholders. So it depends, what are the details, and people used to refer to that. They use that as their guideline document, for example.
Agree. So when I think about teams, I don't want to create a document just for the sake of it, which is collect dust in Confluence, right? And no one can
Yeah.
find it.
Yeah.
I would rather, use team meetings as an opportunity and, just discuss about that approach. But I might create something when I'm talking to other, like departments, and we want to align everyone. So it can vary. Like my
Yeah.
internal team, I don't
Yeah.
I'm not going to create because we are aligned, and I'll
Yeah.
use like meetings to continuously advocate about those like quality engineering
Yeah.
practices.
Yeah.
But for various department, I will create something like how our team is approaching to
Mm.
quality.
Yeah. So it's such an interesting conversation. Let's touch upon that. Is spoke about what it is and how it has evolved, but have you had any experience of it never worked? Like you had a strategy, you knew that you as a team created it, but then it never worked. Is there any such situation or anything that you experienced that it never worked?
Not like never worked, but
Mm.
sometimes we can get, bit over ambitious with the things we want to achieve.
Yeah.
And we will document this, yes, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, because we generally want to do. But when you're working within the team, it's easy to implement that strategy because you're
Mm.
working with a small group. But when you're working on a strategy which is at org level, and there are so many moving parts, each team
Mm.
will have might be at a different level. Some teams might have a good automation, some teams will think as a whole team ownership, whereas some
Mm.
teams might not have automation. Some teams might think quality or testing is just one person's responsibility. Then it can get a bit complicated. So in that case, yeah, I've been there where we created something think, yes, we are going to implement this will help us to shift that dial.
Mm.
Then you can hit some blockers. So my only suggestion would be, when you are creating a strategy, don't get too over ambitious. It is a living document. Remember,
Mm.
you can always evolve or extend it. So try to do a little bit of it, work with the teams, and then roll out the phase two of your strategy document rather than creating a Bible.
I can definitely say like pretty similar of experience of me as well. Like we like in one of the team that I was working on, we were so excited on one of the new smallest project that we were working on. We said, oh yeah, let's have this, let's do this, let's have a strategy. Everyone was excited and we all created it. And then no one ever when I say no one ever used it, it's like no one ever referred to it or never used it to say when we matched it, right? What we have agreed what we want to do, but then what we are doing, it never matched. And then I was like, okay, why? Like, and then like when I went to the teams, they were like, the devs and asked the feedback, then they were like, oh, we know, I think it was good to do the session and have a strategy documented. It was
Sometimes they
cool,
agree
but
things on paper but
yeah,
don't
we
adopt.
agreed. Yeah, we agreed, but we didn't knew how to action that.
Hmm.
So it didn't work. Like, in those situations, that's one of the experience I had, like where it didn't work. It was like they knew how to do what it was, but then they were like, we didn't knew how to action it. So we never referred to it. So I was like, wow, that was like for me, like an eye-opening moment to say like, okay, it's not about just having it, but they need guidance and help around how to action that as well. So that was one of the experience where it didn't work, even though we had a amazing strategy where we all agreed to it, but it didn't work for me. So yeah, I loved our conversation. It was amazing, and test strategy, like evolved into quality strategy. Overall conversation we had is like it's amazing, and thanks to all of you who's listening to us. And if you have enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with someone. It might be useful for someone who is listening to this.
Yeah, and like Praveen said, shared some examples where the strategy didn't work. So if you have any examples where the strategy worked or didn't work, do share those examples with us, and also share, how has your quality strategy evolved over the time? What's changed for you in the way you think about quality? Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, keep it unfiltered. Thanks again for listening to Quality Unfiltered. Cheers. Bye now.